The restaurant smelled like garlic butter and expensive perfume. Every table was full. Waiters moved fast, weaving between chairs with trays balanced on their palms, trying to keep up with a Friday night crowd that tipped well but complained louder. Brooke Ellis had been on her feet for 6 hours straight. Her lower back ached in that dull, familiar way it always did by 9 o'clock, but she kept her smile steady. She refilled water glasses, cleared plates, laughed politely at a joke a customer had told twice already. She was good at her job. Not because she loved carrying trays of overpriced pasta, but because she needed this job, and needing something teaches you how to be good at it. At table 12, a woman in a deep red dress was getting louder. Vanessa Holloway had that particular way of talking where she wasn't really speaking to the people at her table anymore. She was performing for the whole restaurant. Diamond earrings caught the light every time she moved her head. 3 friends sat around her, phones already out, laughing at things that weren't especially funny. "Where is he?" Vanessa said, checking the time on her phone for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. "He said 7:30. "Nathan's always exactly on time," one of her friends said. Something must have come up. Vanessa waved a hand, like the comment bored her. Her eyes drifted across the room, scanning, looking for something to entertain her while she waited. That's when she found Brooke. She watched her for a moment. Watched the way Brooke moved between tables, competent, unhurried despite the chaos, polite even when a customer snapped at her for bringing the wrong side dish. Something about it made Vanessa smile in a way that wasn't kind.
"Hey!"
Vanessa called out, loud enough that the tables nearby went quiet.
"You, waitress!"
Brooke turned, balancing a tray of empty glasses. "Yes, ma'am? Can I get you something? I've got a proposition for you." Vanessa reached into her clutch and pulled out a thick white envelope. She opened it just enough to show the edges of $100 bills stacked inside. $10,000. Right here. All you have to do is dance for it. Right there, in the middle of the floor. A few nearby customers laughed, unsure if it was a joke. Brooke's stomach dropped. "I'm sorry? You heard me." Vanessa set the envelope on the table and tapped it with a manicured nail. "Dance. $10,000. Cash. Right now. I think a girl your size could use it, don't you?" The silence that followed was worse than any yelling. Brooke felt her face go hot. Around the restaurant, heads were turning. Phones were rising. Someone at the next table murmured something to their partner and lifted their camera slightly higher, angling it toward Brooke like she was already a performance. Brooke's hands tightened around the tray. She thought about the rent due in 9 days. She thought about her manager watching from the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, saying nothing. She thought about how one bad review from a table like this could cost her more than a night of dignity ever could. "I'm working right now," Brooke said carefully, keeping her voice even. "I'd be happy to bring you anything from the menu." That wasn't a no. Vanessa smiled wider, delighted now, sensing an audience. She stood up from her chair, holding the envelope higher so more people could see it. "Come on, everyone's watching. Don't be shy. $10,000 doesn't come around every day for someone who works a job like this." Laughter rippled through a cluster of tables near hers. Not everyone. Most people looked uncomfortable, some looked away entirely. But enough people laughed that it filled the room, and laughter has a way of making a moment feel bigger than it is. Brooke felt something crack quietly inside her chest. She had been mocked before. She had learned, a long time ago, how to keep her face still when it happened. But this was different. This was public, recorded, and it was happening in slow motion, everyone waiting to see what she would do. "Ma'am, I really can't." $10,000, Vanessa said again, sing-song now, waving the envelope like a flag. "That's more than you probably make in months. All you have to do is move a little. Come on, show us something." Brooke's throat tightened. She opened her mouth, not entirely sure what was about to come out of it. An apology, a refusal, she didn't know, when the front door of the restaurant opened. A man walked in. He was young, maybe late 20s, dressed simply but expensively, the kind of quiet expensive that didn't need a label to prove itself. He moved like someone who was never in a hurry, because the world tended to wait for him. The hostess straightened up immediately when she saw him. 2 waiters near the kitchen door went very still. Vanessa's face lit up. "Nathan, you're finally..." But Nathan Mercer wasn't looking at her. His eyes had gone straight to the middle of the restaurant, to the envelope of cash raised in the air, to the waitress standing frozen with a tray shaking slightly in her hands, to dozens of phones pointed at her, like she was something to be consumed. He didn't say a word yet. He simply stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the whole scene. The laughter, the cameras, the woman he was supposed to marry standing at the center of it, smiling like she'd done nothing wrong at all. Then he started walking. Nathan crossed the restaurant without saying a single word. He didn't rush. He didn't look angry, not in any way that showed on his face, but something about the way he moved made the room quiet down on its own, table by table, the way a wind dies before a storm actually breaks. Phones that had been pointed at Brooke slowly dropped, as if people sensed they'd need to watch something else now. Vanessa's smile hadn't faded yet. She turned toward him, arms slightly open, ready to greet him the way she always did. A kiss on the cheek, some clever remark about him being late. "There you are," she said. "You would not believe what I just..." Nathan walked past her. He didn't stop until he reached Brooke, who was still standing frozen with the tray of glasses trembling faintly in her hands. Up close, he could see her jaw clenched tight, her eyes glassy in that particular way people get when they're fighting hard not to cry in front of strangers. He lowered his voice so only she could hear him. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. Not tonight, not for anyone in this room." Brooke blinked at him, unsure what to say. Nobody had spoken to her like that all night. Nobody had spoken to her, actually. They had spoken at her, like she was a stage prop waiting for direction. Nathan turned his head slightly toward the small group of musicians playing near the back corner, a violinist and a pianist who'd been keeping a soft, elegant tune running under the noise of the restaurant all evening. They had stopped playing the moment the commotion started, unsure what else to do. "Please continue," Nathan said to them, calm and polite. "Whatever you were playing before." The pianist exchanged a glance with the violinist, then nodded, and slowly the music started again, filling the tense silence with something gentler. Nathan turned back to Brooke and held out his hand, not grabbing, not demanding, just offered, the way someone asks permission for something rather than assumes it. "Would you allow me one dance?" he asked. "Not for money, not for anyone watching, just so that everyone in this room understands that no one gets to demand a performance from you like you're not a person standing right in front of them." Brooke stared at his hand for a long moment. Her tray was still balanced against her hip, the glasses clinking faintly from the small tremor she hadn't been able to stop since Vanessa first called out to her. She glanced toward the kitchen doorway, where her manager stood, still frozen, still saying nothing, offering her no help and no permission either. She looked back at Nathan. "I don't even know your name," she said quietly. "Nathan," he said, "and you don't owe me an answer. But I'd rather you dance because you chose to, not because someone held money over your head like a leash." Something in the way he said it, not performative, not trying to look good for the room, just steady and sure, made Brooke set the tray down on the nearest empty table. Her hands were still shaking slightly when she placed her palm in his. The restaurant had gone almost completely silent, except for the music. Nathan led her a few steps into the open space near the center of the floor, the same spot Vanessa had wanted her to dance in only a minute earlier, except now everything about it felt different. He held her hand lightly, his other hand resting respectfully at a distance on her shoulder, keeping the dance simple, unhurried, nothing like a performance, and everything like two people being polite to each other in front of a room full of strangers. Brooke felt her throat tighten as they moved, not from embarrassment this time, from something closer to disbelief. Around them, phones slowly began lifting again, but this time, no one was laughing. A few people were smiling in a different way now, the kind of smile that comes from watching something unexpectedly decent happen in a place that had, just moments ago, felt cruel. The song ended after a minute or so. Nathan stepped back and gave Brooke a small, respectful nod, like he was thanking her, rather than the other way around. Then he walked back toward Vanessa's table. The envelope of cash was still sitting where she'd left it. Nathan picked it up, looked at it for a moment, then set it gently back down in front of her. "Kindness isn't something you can buy," he said, his voice even, not raised at all, but carrying easily across the silent room. "And it's definitely not something you get to demand from someone whose job depends on staying polite to you." Vanessa's face had gone pale, her earlier excitement completely drained out of it. "Nathan, it was just a joke. Everyone thought it was funny." "Not everyone," Nathan said simply. He glanced briefly at the tables around them, at the people who had looked uncomfortable rather than amused. Then his eyes moved to Brooke, still standing near the center of the floor. "I'm sorry," he told her, loud enough for the room to hear this time. "Not just for what happened tonight, but for every person in here who watched it happen and said nothing, including me, for not walking through that door 2 minutes sooner." Brooke didn't know what to say. No apology had ever been handed to her so plainly, so publicly, without asking for anything back. Nathan didn't wait for a response. He didn't argue further with Vanessa, didn't cause a scene, didn't demand anyone clap or thank him. He simply turned, walked back across the restaurant, and left through the same door he'd entered only minutes before, alone, without looking back. The room stayed quiet for a long moment after the door closed behind him. Then, slowly, conversations started up again, hushed and different than before. People were no longer talking about the dance challenge. They were talking about the man who walked in, said almost nothing, and somehow changed the entire mood of the room without raising his voice once. By the time Brooke finished her shift that night, 3 different phones near the kitchen were already buzzing. The videos were spreading. By morning, Nathan's name was everywhere. Brooke found out before she even got out of bed. Her phone had been buzzing on the nightstand since 6 a.m., and when she finally reached over and unlocked it, she found over 200 notifications waiting for her. Messages, tags, comments, shares. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes, and opened the first video someone had sent her. It was her, standing in the middle of the restaurant floor, holding a stranger's hand, dancing quietly while half the room watched in silence. The caption underneath read, "Mafia boss shuts down his fiancée's cruel challenge. This is the man Chicago should be talking about." Brooke felt her stomach twist. She hadn't even known his full name until she read it in the caption. Nathan Mercer. She scrolled further and the word Mafia kept appearing again and again, though nobody in the comments seemed to actually know what that meant, beyond rumors and guesses. What she did understand, reading comment after comment, was that people had opinions about her now. Strangers, thousands of them. She looked so uncomfortable, poor girl. I would have quit on the spot. Why is nobody talking about the woman who did this to her? Brooke set her phone face down on the blanket and stared at the ceiling for a long moment, trying to steady her breathing. This wasn't what she wanted. She hadn't asked to be seen by anyone outside that restaurant, let alone by people across the entire internet, debating her life, like she was a character in a story, instead of someone who still had a rent payment due in 8 days. Across the city, Nathan sat behind his desk on the top floor of Mercer Hospitality's downtown office, a wall of windows behind him overlooking the gray morning sky. He hadn't slept much. Not because of guilt exactly, but because the whole night kept replaying in his mind, the envelope of cash raised in the air, the frozen look on Brooke's face, the sound of laughter that had made his stomach turn the moment he walked through the door. His phone had been ringing since 7. Dominic, one of his oldest and most trusted associates, let himself into the office without knocking, a tablet tucked under his arm and a look on his face that told Nathan exactly what kind of conversation this was going to be. "You've seen it," Dominic said, dropping into the chair across from Nathan's desk. "I don't need to see it. I was there. The video's got 4 million views already. Chicago's turning you into some kind of folk hero overnight." Dominic set the tablet down and slid it across the desk anyway. "And Vanessa's getting torn apart in the comments. Her family's going to hear about this before lunch, if they haven't already." Nathan didn't touch the tablet. "That's not my concern right now. It should be, a little." Dominic leaned back, folding his arms. "Nathan, the engagement matters. Her family's connections matter. You know that better than anyone. This is exactly the kind of thing that gets blown out of proportion for no reason, and now the whole city's watching to see what you do next. My advice, let it die down. Don't make any public statement. Don't visit the restaurant again. Let people move on to the next thing they're outraged about, and in a week, nobody will remember any of this." Nathan was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the skyline. Then he shook his head slowly. "I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen just because it's inconvenient. It's not about convenience. It's about a woman who works 6 days a week, getting humiliated in front of a room full of people who thought it was entertainment," Nathan said, his voice calm but firm. "You want me to just walk away from that because it might complicate something with Vanessa's family?" Dominic sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "I'm not saying what happened was right. I'm saying you've got a lot riding on this engagement, and the people watching this online don't know you, don't know Vanessa, and they'll forget about all of it by next week, regardless of what you do." "Maybe," Nathan said, "but I'll still know what I did or didn't do. That matters more to me than what strangers online think, or what her family expects." He tapped his fingers once against the desk, thinking. Character doesn't show up in how someone treats people who matter to them. It shows up in how they treat someone they'll never see again, a stranger, somebody they think doesn't have any power to affect their life. Dominic didn't have a response for that right away. He just watched Nathan for a long moment, then finally nodded, picking the tablet back up. "All right," he said, "but you know this isn't going away quietly. Not now." "I never expected it to," Nathan said quietly. Back in her small apartment, Brooke finally forced herself to get up and make coffee, though her hands were still a little unsteady from lack of sleep. Her phone kept buzzing on the counter, and she resisted the urge to check it again for almost 20 minutes before curiosity won out. A text from her manager was waiting among the noise. "Can you come in an hour early today? We need to talk before your shift." Brooke's stomach dropped reading it. She didn't know if it meant good news or bad. Maybe the attention had made her a liability instead of a person worth defending. Maybe the restaurant wanted to distance itself from all of it, quietly let her go so the story could fade without dragging their name through it. She thought about the $10,000 Vanessa had waved around like a leash, and how strange it was that after the most humiliating night of her working life, all she really wanted was for everything to go back to exactly how boring and unnoticed it had been before. She hadn't asked to be turned into a symbol for anything. She just wanted to keep her job. Brooke arrived at the restaurant an hour early, exactly like her manager had asked, her stomach tight the whole walk over. The streets outside were still waking up, delivery trucks idling by the curb, a couple of joggers passing with earbuds in, completely unaware that the small restaurant they were passing had become the center of half the city's conversation overnight. She let herself in through the staff entrance and found her manager, Carla, standing near the host stand, arms crossed, looking more nervous than angry. "Thanks for coming in early," Carla said. "There's someone here who wants to talk to you before we open." Brooke's chest tightened. "Am I being let go?" No, nothing like that." Carla glanced toward the dining room, then lowered her voice. "It's him, Nathan Mercer. He called the owner directly this morning and asked if he could come by before opening hours. Said he wanted to speak with you privately. The owner's already here." Brooke stood frozen for a second, unsure what to feel. Relief that she wasn't losing her job, battled with confusion about why a man she'd danced with once, for less than 2 minutes, wanted to see her again the next morning. She followed Carla into the dining room, where the restaurant owner, a heavy-set man named Frank, who Brooke had worked under for almost 3 years, stood near one of the empty tables with Nathan. The chairs were still stacked in some corners from the closing shift. The morning light coming through the windows made the whole room look different from how it had looked the night before. Quieter, smaller, less like a stage. Nathan turned when he saw her, and something in his expression eased slightly, like he'd been unsure whether she'd actually come. "Thank you for meeting me," he said. "I wasn't sure I had a choice," Brooke admitted, glancing briefly at Frank, who gave her an encouraging nod before stepping back to give them some space, though he didn't leave the room entirely. "You always have a choice," Nathan said. "I meant what I said last night. I'm not here to ask anything of you." He gestured toward one of the tables. "Would you sit with me for a few minutes? I won't take much of your time before your shift starts." Brooke hesitated, then pulled out a chair and sat, keeping her posture straight, unsure what kind of conversation this was about to be. Nathan sat across from her, folding his hands on the table. "I want to be clear about something first. I'm not here to offer you money, or a job, or anything that could look like charity. I know how that might come across, after everything that happened, and I don't want you to think that's why I asked to see you." "Then why did you?" Brooke asked, more directly than she meant to. "Because an apology in front of a room full of strangers isn't the same as a real one," Nathan said. "I said what I said last night because it needed to be said publicly, in that moment. But you don't know me, and I don't know you, and I thought you deserved a chance to actually hear an apology from me, without cameras and without an audience." Brooke studied him for a moment. There was something steady about the way he spoke, no hesitation, no performance in it, like he'd thought carefully about what he wanted to say before walking through the door. "I appreciate that," she said slowly. "But honestly, the dance wasn't even the hardest part." Nathan tilted his head slightly. "What do you mean?" Brooke looked down at the table, tracing a small scratch in the wood with her finger, before she answered. "The hardest part wasn't her holding up money, or asking me to dance. People say ignorant things all the time, and usually I can just brush it off and keep working. What got to me was everyone else. All those people sitting around, watching, laughing along like it was some kind of show. Nobody said anything. Nobody told her to stop. They just pulled out their phones like I was there for their entertainment." She paused, her voice quieter now. "That's the part I keep thinking about. Not her. Everyone who let it happen." Nathan was silent for a long moment, absorbing that. He hadn't expected the conversation to shift in that direction. But the more she spoke, the more he understood that the real wound wasn't the challenge itself. It was the collective silence surrounding it. "You're right," he said finally. "And that's on more than just her. That's on everyone in that room, myself included, since I didn't get there until it was already happening." "You still did something," Brooke said. "Nobody else did." Doing something after the fact doesn't erase the fact that it happened in the first place, Nathan said. I keep thinking about how many times something like that probably happens in places like this, and nobody happens to walk in at the right moment. Brooke didn't answer that right away. She hadn't expected him to say something like that. Most people who apologized wanted credit for the apology itself, wanted her to reassure them that they'd done enough, that they were one of the good ones. Nathan didn't seem interested in being reassured. I don't know what you want me to say, Brooke admitted honestly. I appreciate what you did, but I also just want to go back to my normal life. I don't want to be famous for getting humiliated on camera. I understand that, Nathan said, and I won't do anything that puts more attention on you than you already have. I just wanted you to know the apology was real, not just something for the crowd. He stood up after that, careful not to overstay the moment. Thank you for talking to me. I won't take up any more of your morning. Brooke watched him walk toward the door, pausing briefly to speak with Frank in a low voice she couldn't quite hear, before finally stepping out into the street. She sat alone at the table for a minute after he left, turning the conversation over in her mind. Something about what he'd said stuck with her. Not the apology itself, but the fact that he seemed more troubled by the silence of the crowd than by his fiancée's behavior. She didn't know it yet, but that single sentence would end up changing far more than just her morning. Nathan, walking back to his car outside, found himself thinking the same thing. This wasn't just about Vanessa anymore. Nathan sent Vanessa a message that afternoon, asking her to meet him at the penthouse before dinner. She replied almost instantly, relieved, assuming the worst of the night before had already passed. Finally, I was starting to think you were avoiding me. He wasn't avoiding her. He'd spent the whole day turning the conversation with Brooke over in his mind, and by the time evening came, he had a clearer sense of what he needed to say to Vanessa, even if he wasn't sure yet how she'd take it. She was already waiting when he arrived, standing near the wide windows of the penthouse living room, with a glass of wine in hand, dressed like she was preparing for an ordinary date night rather than a difficult conversation. She smiled the moment she saw him. "There you are," she said, setting her glass down and crossing the room toward him. "Can we please talk about how insane this whole thing has gotten? My phone hasn't stopped buzzing since last night. People I haven't spoken to in years are messaging me like I committed a crime." "Vanessa," Nathan said, his tone even but firm enough that she paused. "Sit down for a minute. I want to talk to you about last night." She blinked, some of the brightness fading from her expression, but she sat anyway, perching on the edge of the couch. "Okay, talk." Nathan remained standing, choosing his words carefully. "I've been thinking about it all day. I want to understand why you did it. Not to punish you for it. I just want to understand." Vanessa let out a short laugh, though it didn't carry much humor in it. "Nathan, it was a joke. A dumb one, maybe, but a joke. I offered her $10,000. Do you understand how much money that is to someone working a job like that? I thought I was being generous, honestly. I didn't think anyone would react like this." She was terrified, Nathan said quietly. "You held money over her head in front of a room full of strangers and told her to perform for it. That's not generosity. I wasn't forcing her to do anything. She could have said no. She tried to. You kept pushing." Vanessa's jaw tightened slightly. "Because it was funny, Nathan. Everyone at my table thought it was funny. Half the restaurant was laughing along. That doesn't make it right. It makes it worse." She stood up now, arms crossing over her chest, some of her earlier composure slipping. "I don't understand why you're acting like I did something unforgivable. She's a waitress. I offered her money. If anything, she should be thanking me for the attention, considering half the internet is now obsessed with her because of what happened." Nathan felt something settle heavily in his chest, hearing her say it so plainly. "Do you hear yourself right now? What? You think you did her a favor?" Nathan said, his voice quieter now, though the disbelief in it was unmistakable. You humiliated someone in front of an entire restaurant, and you genuinely believe she should be grateful for it. I offered her $10,000 for basically nothing, Vanessa snapped. People dream about opportunities like that. I don't understand why everyone's acting like I'm some kind of villain for offering to pay someone generously. Because you weren't offering her anything, Nathan said. You were using your money to force someone into performing for your entertainment, and you don't even realize how cruel that is. That's the part that worries me, Vanessa. Not what happened at the restaurant, the fact that you still don't see why it was wrong. The room went quiet for a long moment. Vanessa's expression shifted from frustration to something more guarded, like she was recalculating how this conversation was supposed to go. So what? You're defending some random waitress over me now? She asked. Is that what this is? You danced with her in front of everyone, apologized to her like I'm some kind of monster, and now you're standing here lecturing me about kindness? I'm not comparing you to her, Nathan said. I'm asking you to understand why what you did was hurtful. That's all. I'm not trying to embarrass you. Well, you did, Vanessa said, her voice rising now. You humiliated me, in front of the entire restaurant, in front of my friends, and now the whole city thinks I'm some spoiled monster because of one stupid joke that got out of hand. Do you understand what this is doing to my reputation, to my family's name? Nathan studied her for a long moment, something in his chest going quiet and still, the way it does when a decision starts forming somewhere beneath the surface, even before the mind fully catches up to it. I understand you're upset, he said finally, but everything you just said was about your reputation, not about her, not once. Vanessa opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, seeming to realize a beat too late how that sounded. That's not fair, she said, quieter now. Maybe not, Nathan said, but it's true. He didn't say anything else after that. He simply nodded once, said he needed to head out, and left the penthouse quieter than when he'd arrived, leaving Vanessa standing near the window with her wine glass forgotten on the side table. Across town, in a small corner cafe with mismatched chairs and the smell of fresh bread drifting from the kitchen, Brooke sat across from her longtime friend Denise, stirring a cup of tea she hadn't actually taken a sip of yet. You've barely said anything since you got here, Denise said gently. Brooke shrugged, staring down at the table. I don't really know what to say. Everyone keeps asking me how I feel about being internet famous, like it's something exciting. I don't feel excited. I just want things to go back to normal. You don't want to be famous? Denise asked, half teasing. No, Brooke said honestly. I want to go to work, get through my shift, come home, and not have strangers analyzing my life like it's entertainment. That's it. That's the whole goal. Denise reached across the table and squeezed her hand gently. For what it's worth, I think what he did was pretty remarkable. Brooke was quiet for a moment, thinking of Nathan's face that morning, the way he'd seemed more bothered by the silence of the crowd than by anything else. Yeah, she admitted softly. It was. She just hoped it wouldn't cost her the quiet, ordinary life she still wanted back. Nathan didn't go back to his office the next morning. Instead, he had his driver take him to one of the smaller hotels under Mercer Hospitality's ownership, a boutique property on the north side of the city that he hadn't personally visited in over a year. He walked in through the front entrance without any announcement, no assistant trailing behind him, no meeting scheduled on anyone's calendar. The front desk manager, a young woman named Priya, nearly dropped the folder she was holding when she recognized him. Mr. Mercer, I wasn't told you'd be visiting today. Let me call the general manager. There's no need, Nathan said. I'm not here for an inspection. I just wanted to talk to some of the staff, if that's all right. Whoever has a few minutes. Priya blinked, clearly unsure what to make of the request, but nodded, and led him toward the back offices anyway. Over the next hour, Nathan sat with 3 different employees, one at a time, in a small break room that smelled like reheated coffee. He asked simple questions. How long had they worked there? What their days usually looked like? Whether they felt like management actually listened when something went wrong. The answers surprised him more than he expected. A housekeeper named Teresa, who'd worked at the hotel for 6 years, told him quietly that she'd once reported a guest for yelling at her over a late checkout, and nothing had happened. No follow-up, no acknowledgement. She'd simply been told to avoid that guest's floor for the rest of his stay. A young valet named Marcus admitted he'd stopped bringing up small problems altogether because it never seemed to change anything, and raising concerns just made him look difficult. By the 3rd conversation, Nathan wasn't asking questions anymore so much as listening, letting each person talk longer than he'd planned, absorbing details he realized he should have already known about businesses that carried his family's name. "Do people usually get asked things like this?" Teresa asked him near the end of their conversation. "Nobody from management's ever sat down with me like this before." "They should have," Nathan said. "That's on us, not on you." He visited 2 more properties that week, a restaurant downtown and a smaller boutique hotel near the river, and the pattern repeated itself almost exactly. Employees who worked hard, stayed professional, and rarely felt like anyone above them noticed the effort unless something went wrong. By Thursday afternoon, Nathan called a meeting with the senior executives at Mercer Hospitality's headquarters, a glass-walled conference room on the 40th floor, overlooking the lake. Dominic sat near the head of the table, along with the company's operations director, the HR lead, and 2 regional managers who oversaw dozens of properties across the city. "I want to talk about something that isn't in this quarter's numbers," Nathan said, standing at the head of the table instead of sitting. "I spent the last few days visiting some of our properties, talking to staff directly. Not managers, line staff, housekeepers, servers, valets. The operations director, a sharp older man named Richard, raised an eyebrow. "Is there a specific concern, Nathan? We can pull performance reports if something's underperforming." "That's exactly the problem," Nathan said. "We measure everything through numbers. Occupancy rates, table turnover, customer satisfaction scores. We don't measure whether the people actually working these jobs feel respected while they're doing them." Richard shifted slightly in his chair. "With respect, that's a difficult thing to measure." "It's not that difficult," Nathan said. "We ask them, directly, anonymously if they're worried about retaliation." He glanced around the table. "I want every property under this company to have an anonymous feedback system that actually gets reviewed by someone above property level, not a suggestion box that collects dust in a manager's office. Something real, something that gets acted on." The HR lead, a woman named Grace who'd been mostly quiet, leaned forward. "We could build something like that within a month. It wouldn't be complicated." "Good," Nathan said. "I also want workplace respect training rolled out across every property. Not the kind that's a checkbox exercise people click through in 5 minutes. Something that actually addresses how staff should be treated by customers and what management's responsibility is when that line gets crossed." Dominic, who'd stayed quiet through most of the meeting, finally spoke. "This is about the restaurant thing, isn't it? The waitress." Nathan didn't deny it. "It started there, but it's bigger than one incident. I spent a week talking to people who've worked for this company for years and never once felt like anyone above them was paying attention to how they were treated. That's not a small problem. That's something we should have fixed a long time ago." Richard exhaled slowly, some resistance still lingering in his posture, but he nodded eventually. "It's a reasonable request. I'll have my team start drafting a rollout plan." "Thank you," Nathan said. He looked around the table once more. "I don't want anyone spinning this publicly as some kind of statement. I'm not doing this for press. I just want it done properly, and I want it done soon. The meeting wrapped up shortly after, executives filing out with new assignments, and quiet murmurs of surprise at how directly Nathan had pushed the issue. Dominic lingered behind, watching Nathan gather his notes. "You know," Dominic said, "a week ago you were telling me this whole situation would blow over if we just let it." "I was wrong," Nathan admitted. "I thought this was about damage control, about Vanessa, about the engagement, about how it looked publicly. It's not. It's about how many people like Brooke are working for us right now, dealing with things nobody ever bothers asking them about." Dominic studied him for a moment, then gave a small, approving nod. "For what it's worth, this is a better use of the company's attention than most of what crosses my desk." Nathan allowed himself a small, tired smile. "Let's just make sure it actually changes something, not just paperwork." Miles away, finishing another ordinary shift at the restaurant, Brooke had no idea that any of this was happening. She didn't know that conversations happening on the 40th floor of a glass building downtown had been shaped, even partly, by the words she'd said to Nathan across a small table 3 mornings earlier. She just knew her feet still ached by the end of every shift, and that, slowly, the messages on her phone had started to quiet down. She was grateful for that, at least. Nathan chose the botanical garden on purpose. No cameras waited at the gates there. No valets who might recognize him and mention it to someone later. No crowded dining room where every word could become someone's story to tell. Just glass greenhouses, quiet paths, and the low hum of a fountain somewhere past the rose beds. Vanessa arrived a few minutes after him, wrapped in a light coat despite the mild afternoon, sunglasses pushed up into her hair. She looked wary the moment she saw him waiting near the entrance, like she already sensed this wasn't going to be an ordinary conversation. "You picked a strange place to talk," she said, walking up to him. "I thought you'd want somewhere more private, given everything." "This is private," Nathan said. "That's the point." They walked together along a stone path that curved past beds of late-blooming flowers, neither speaking for a while. The silence wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. It felt like the kind of quiet that comes before something important gets said. Both of them aware of it, neither in a hurry to be the one who broke it first. "I've been thinking a lot this past week," Nathan finally said, as they reached a bench near a small pond. He gestured for her to sit, and she did, though her posture stayed stiff, guarded. "About the restaurant," Vanessa said flatly. "It wasn't a question. About us," Nathan corrected gently. "About what this past week showed me." Vanessa's jaw tightened slightly, but she didn't interrupt. "I've spent the last several days visiting our properties," Nathan continued, "talking to people who work for us. Housekeepers, servers, valets, people whose names most executives never bother learning. And every conversation kept bringing me back to that night at the restaurant, to the way you looked at Brooke, like she wasn't a person standing in front of you, just something there for your entertainment. I told you already, it wasn't meant to be cruel. I know that's what you believe," Nathan said, cutting in softly but firmly. "That's actually what worries me the most. Not that you did something cruel in the moment. People make mistakes. What worries me is that a week later, you still don't understand why it was cruel at all." Vanessa looked away, toward the pond, her arms crossing over her chest. "So what? This is some kind of test I failed?" "It's not a test," Nathan said. "It's who you are. And I've spent the last week realizing I don't think I actually know who that is. Not fully. Not in the way someone should know the person they're planning to marry." She turned back to him sharply. "Nathan, I made one mistake. One. And you're acting like it defines my entire character." "It's not the mistake itself," Nathan said patiently. "It's everything that's happened since. I asked you to reflect on it, and every time we've talked, you've turned the conversation back to how it affected you. your reputation, your family's name. Not once have you asked how Brooke is doing. Not once have you shown any concern for the person actually hurt that night. Vanessa opened her mouth to argue, then stopped herself, something flickering across her face. Not quite guilt, but closer to recognition, like she was hearing the pattern laid out clearly for the first time and couldn't immediately find a way around it. "I can forgive mistakes," Nathan said quietly. "I've made plenty of my own, but I can't build a life with someone who won't acknowledge when they've hurt someone else. Marriage isn't just about two people who care about each other, it's about sharing values. And I don't think we share the same ones. Not the way I thought we did." The silence that followed stretched longer this time. Vanessa stared down at her hands, twisting the engagement ring slowly around her finger, not removing it yet, just turning it, like she was buying herself a few more seconds before whatever came next became real. "You're ending this," she said finally. It wasn't quite a question, though there was still a small note of disbelief in it. "I think it's the right decision," Nathan said, "for both of us." "Because of a waitress," Vanessa said, though the bitterness in her voice had faded into something quieter, more tired than angry. "Because of what that night showed me about how you see people who have less than you," Nathan said. "That's not something I can overlook, no matter how much I care about you." Vanessa was quiet for a long time after that, staring out at the pond, watching a pair of ducks drift lazily near the reeds. When she finally spoke again, her voice had lost most of its earlier edge. "I don't know how to be the person you're describing," she admitted, so softly, Nathan almost didn't catch it. "I've never had to think about people like her. Not really. It's not that I think I'm better than someone like that. I just never had to consider it." "That's exactly the problem," Nathan said gently. "Not thinking about it at all." Vanessa nodded slowly, some of the tension finally leaving her shoulders, replaced by something closer to quiet resignation. She slipped the ring off her finger, turning it once between her fingers before holding it out to him. "I'm not going to fight you on this," she said. "I don't think I even want to, if I'm honest. I think some part of me already knew this conversation was coming, the moment you walked out of that restaurant without saying goodbye." Nathan took the ring carefully, closing his hand around it, without saying anything for a moment. "For what it's worth," Vanessa added, standing up from the bench, "I hope she's doing okay. The waitress, I never actually asked, did I?" "No," Nathan said. "You didn't." Vanessa nodded again, like she was accepting that fact, rather than defending against it. She adjusted her coat, glanced once more at the pond, then looked back at him. "Goodbye, Nathan," she said, her voice steady despite everything. "Goodbye, Vanessa." She turned and walked back down the path alone, her footsteps slow but certain, disappearing eventually past the rows of blooming flowers toward the garden's entrance. Nathan stayed on the bench a while longer, the ring still resting in his closed hand, watching the ducks drift quietly across the water, feeling, for the first time in days, like he'd finally made a decision he wouldn't need to second-guess. 9 days after the video first spread across the internet, a notice appeared on the community board near the restaurant's employee break room. Brooke almost walked past it without noticing, too tired from a double shift to pay attention to anything taped to a corkboard covered in old schedules and expired coupons. It was Denise's message that made her go back and actually read it. "Did you see the flyer at work? Hospitality Leadership Scholarship. Sounds like something you should apply for." Brooke stood in front of the board that evening, after her shift ended, reading the details twice. A new scholarship program, funded anonymously, offering tuition and mentorship for restaurant and hotel workers who wanted to pursue further education in hospitality management. Applications were open to any employee across a list of participating restaurants and hotels throughout the city. No experience required beyond current employment in the industry. She read the fine print at the bottom, Selection based entirely on demonstrated dedication and work ethic, evaluated through manager recommendations and a short written statement. Brooke folded her arms, staring at it for a long moment. "You should apply," Carla said, coming up behind her with a stack of folded napkins in her arms. "I already put your name forward on the manager recommendation, actually. Figured you wouldn't mind." Brooke turned, surprised. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to." Carla set the napkins down on a nearby table. "You've been here 3 years, Brooke. You handle difficult tables better than anyone else on staff, you never complain, and you stayed professional through something most people would have walked away from. If anyone here deserves a shot like this, it's you." Brooke felt a familiar discomfort creep up, the same instinct that always made her deflect attention rather than accept it. "There's probably 100 people applying who've wanted this longer than I have. People who've been dreaming about management positions for years. I never really thought about it before. So think about it now," Carla said simply. "What's the harm in applying?" Brooke didn't answer right away. She thought about it that whole walk home, turning the idea over uncertainly, the same way she'd turned over everything since that night at the restaurant. With a kind of guarded suspicion, like good things happening to her required some catch she hadn't found yet. She almost didn't submit the application. She'd written the short statement 3 separate times over the following 2 days, deleting each draft before finishing it, convinced each version sounded either too desperate or not impressive enough. It was Denise, sitting across from her at the same corner cafe where they'd met the week before, who finally pushed her to stop overthinking it. "Read me what you've got," Denise said, sliding Brooke's phone back across the table. Brooke sighed and read the paragraph out loud, something about wanting to grow beyond serving tables, about caring for the people she worked with, about wanting to build something more stable for her future. "That's good," Denise said. "Why do you keep deleting it?" "Because it feels like I'm asking for something I haven't earned yet." Denise reached over and squeezed her hand. "Brooke, you've spent 3 years earning it. Every single shift. Just because nobody noticed before doesn't mean it wasn't happening." Brooke looked down at the screen, reading her own words again, and for the first time in a long while let herself sit with the possibility that maybe she deserved this without needing to justify it first. She submitted the application that night, before she could talk herself out of it again. The letter arrived 11 days later, a plain envelope with the Culinary Institute's letterhead in the corner. Brooke stared at it on her kitchen counter for almost 20 minutes before finally opening it, her hands unsteady in a way that reminded her uncomfortably of the night everything had started. She read the first line 3 times before it actually registered. "We are pleased to inform you that you have been selected as one of the inaugural recipients of the Hospitality Leadership Scholarship." She sat down slowly at her kitchen table, reading the rest of the letter in pieces, absorbing details about tuition coverage, mentorship, pairing with an experienced hospitality manager, and a part-time schedule adjustment that would allow her to keep working while completing the program. She called Denise before she'd even finished the letter, her voice breaking slightly when she tried to explain. "I got it," she said. "I actually got it." "Of course you did," Denise said, and Brooke could hear the smile in her voice even through the phone. "I told you." At the restaurant the next day, Carla pulled her aside before the dinner rush, a proud look on her face that Brooke hadn't seen directed at her before. "I heard," Carla said. "Congratulations. Truly." "I still can't believe it," Brooke admitted. "Do you know who's actually funding this? The flyer never said." Carla shook her head. "Frank mentioned it's completely anonymous. Whoever's behind it specifically requested no public credit. Some kind of private donor interested in hospitality workers getting a fair shot at moving up." She shrugged. "Honestly, doesn't matter who it is. What matters is you earned it." Brooke nodded slowly, though something about the timing tugged quietly at the back of her mind. A scholarship appearing less than 2 weeks after her name had been dragged across the internet. Less than 2 weeks after a quiet conversation with a man who'd told her that character shows up in how you treat strangers who can't do anything for you in return. She didn't have proof of anything. It was probably nothing more than coincidence, but some small, cautious part of her wondered anyway. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Brooke allowed herself to imagine a different kind of future, one where she wasn't just surviving each shift, where the ache in her feet by the end of the night meant something building toward a life she actually wanted, rather than simply getting by until the next one started. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her bag, carrying it with her through the rest of her shift like something fragile she wasn't ready to set down just yet. 3 weeks after the night that started everything, a new restaurant opened its doors on a quiet corner in downtown Chicago. It wasn't the same restaurant where Brooke had worked that first evening. This one was new, freshly renovated under Mercer Hospitality's name, with wide windows and warm lighting spilling out onto the sidewalk. A small crowd had gathered outside for the opening, curious about the buzz that had been building around it for days, though most of them had no real idea why this particular opening felt different from any other. Inside, the dining room buzzed with quiet conversation, servers moving between tables with the same careful efficiency Brooke remembered from her old job, except something about the atmosphere here felt different, calmer, steadier. A framed sign near the host stand read simply, "Every person who works here deserves to be treated with dignity. If you witness otherwise, please tell us. We're listening." Brooke stood near the back of the room, dressed not in a server's uniform, but in a simple black blazer, a name badge on her chest that read Hospitality Management Trainee beneath her name. It still felt strange seeing it there, even after 3 weeks of adjusting to her new schedule. Half her time spent shadowing the general manager, learning how the business ran from the inside, the other half still on the floor, close enough to remember exactly why any of this mattered. She watched the opening night unfold with a kind of quiet disbelief, the same feeling she'd had reading her scholarship letter for the first time. Guests filled the tables, servers moved calmly through their sections, and nobody in the room seemed to know or care that 3 weeks earlier none of this had existed. Not the restaurant, not her new position, not the version of herself standing here instead of taking orders at table 12. She was checking in with a young server near the kitchen doors when she noticed Nathan walking through the front entrance. He looked different somehow, though she couldn't quite place why. Maybe just lighter, less guarded than the night she'd first seen him cross a restaurant floor toward her. He greeted a few guests near the entrance, shook hands with the general manager, and made his way slowly through the dining room, stopping occasionally to speak with staff along the way, asking questions, listening more than talking. Eventually, he made his way toward her. "You look like you belong here," he said, a small, genuine smile on his face. "I'm still getting used to it," Brooke admitted. "Half the time I catch myself reaching for a tray out of habit." Nathan laughed quietly at that. Old habits. They stood together for a moment, watching the dining room fill with quiet conversation and the soft clink of glasses. The same sounds that had once made Brooke's stomach twist with dread, now feeling ordinary, even comforting. "I have to ask you something," Brooke said finally, turning to face him. "The scholarship. The anonymous donor. Was that you?" Nathan didn't answer right away, and something in his hesitation told her the answer before he said a word. "It wasn't supposed to be traced back to me," he admitted. "That was the point of keeping it anonymous. I didn't want you to feel like it was charity, or like you owed anyone anything for it. I wanted you to earn it on your own, which you did. Nobody handed you that scholarship. You wrote the application. You got selected based on your own work. But you funded it. I funded the program, Nathan said carefully. For every hospitality worker in this city who's spent years being overlooked, not just for you. You happened to be one of the first people who applied, and from what I heard, one of the strongest candidates by a wide margin. That part had nothing to do with me. Brooke studied him for a long moment, something in her chest loosening slightly, like a knot she hadn't realized she'd been carrying since that first letter arrived. Why keep it secret, though? She asked. You didn't hide anything else. You apologized publicly, ended your engagement without protecting your image, spoke openly about all of it. Why keep this part quiet? Nathan considered the question seriously before answering. Because the other things needed to be public. People needed to see that behavior like Vanessa's has consequences. That silence in a room full of witnesses isn't acceptable. But this, he gestured slightly around the restaurant. This needed to be about you, not about me being seen doing something generous. I didn't want your accomplishment to get overshadowed by a story about my involvement. Brooke was quiet for a moment, absorbing that. It made a strange kind of sense, matching everything she'd learned about him since that first uncomfortable dance in the middle of a crowded restaurant floor. A man who seemed far more interested in doing the right thing quietly than in being recognized for it. Thank you, she said finally. Not just for the scholarship, for that whole night. I don't think I've said that properly yet. You don't need to thank me, Nathan said. You did the actual work. I just tried to make sure the door was open when you were ready to walk through it. Brooke smiled at that. Something steady and genuine, settling over her for the first time in weeks. Around them, the restaurant continued its quiet rhythm of first-night energy, servers moving between tables, guests laughing over shared plates, none of them aware of the conversation happening quietly near the kitchen doors. Nathan glanced around the room once more, taking in the sight of a business built, in part, from lessons learned the hard way. I hope this place becomes something people remember for the right reasons, he said, not because of anything that happened at another restaurant weeks ago, but because of what happens here, every night, to the people working these floors. I think it already is, Brooke said. Later that evening, as the crowd began thinning and the last guests filtered out into the cool night air, Brooke stood near the front entrance, welcoming a final small group inside with the easy, confident warmth she'd always carried, even back when nobody had bothered to notice it. Nathan watched her from across the room for a moment before turning to leave, slipping quietly out the door the same way he'd left that very first night, without ceremony, without needing anyone to acknowledge what he'd done. He walked out into the Chicago evening, knowing that a single decision, made without hesitation in the middle of a crowded room, had rippled far beyond that one uncomfortable night, reaching kitchens and break rooms and quiet conversations across an entire company, all because he'd chosen, once, not to stay silent. Behind him, through the restaurant's wide front windows, Brooke stood confidently at the entrance, welcoming guests through the door of a life she never expected to have.